Okay, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Convene. Sure. No. Yes, let's convene the meeting first. That's a good start. Convene the meeting. Okay. And we have Kay and Mark Mulvihill on the phone. And I know David's here somewhere. Well, we're going to go ahead and start. Okay. Margie's going to do a review of stakeholder recommendations on the achievement compacts and kind of let us know where we stand with those.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us so bright and early at the start of the work week. I sent to folks that were on the committee a number of documents and links on Friday evening, along with an agenda. And one of the key documents that we're working off of today is a summary of the stakeholder recommendations. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And what I've done is I've taken the written documents that were submitted to the OEIB from each of the different stakeholder groups by the end of September and categorized those by the entity that submitted them and what their recommendation was, and then how that mechanism would, where it's reflected, whether it's in statute or in administrative rule or in the guidance documents or the compact itself for each one of the suggestions. For those that were specifically related to the targets, I've added an additional column so that folks would be able to see that at a glance to know which one of these suggestions, recommendations would actually change compact contents. And figure that this would be a good bird's eye way in which to approach the review that we need to do. I'm being contacted many times a week by education entities who are looking for instructions about what the coming year's compacts need to be, and other entities like the Community Colleges and Workforce Development Department and the Department of Education are also looking for that guidance so that they can build the systems that are necessary to support that. So hence the priority for this as one of the assignments for the subcommittee. But Dr. Crew has joined us now, and so...
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to all.
Welcome.
Who's on the phone?
We have Kay Turan and Mark Mulvihill.
Did
somebody else join us? Okay.
Good morning. Good morning to all.
Good morning.
I just wanted to kind of just, by way of just introducing this body of work and the specifics that you'll be going through, I really just wanted to suggest that the nature of this assignment, and for that matter the other subcommittees as well, always was to start with the notion that there should be some guidance and shepherding of ideas as they come out on the floor. That this was not going to be something that essentially became sort of a willy-nilly conversation, whether the conversation was about compacts or the conversation ultimately was about the whole issue of standards when that comes out, or practice as it turns out to be coming to us in a variety of forms, that we needed to have a context within which to see this. That context included both research, it included empirical knowledge and practice on what's happening in the field. It would also include anecdotal information, a whole host of ways by which that we would get a rich and clear picture of what should be the appropriate set of recommendations as it relates to the topic. So today we happen to be talking specifically about a whole host of things. I'm not going to list them all, but I know we're going to ultimately end up getting to this conversation about the compacts. I know that there are enormous numbers of concerns and questions about those compacts as it relates particularly to some of the post-secondary institutions. And again, my counsel to you would be just think through this in a reasoned and thoughtful and engaging way, so that when the recommendation does come forward, it comes forward from a context that can be actually used and usable for the debates that will follow. I suspect that, as always, there are going to be pros and cons on any topic. I invite you as a subcommittee to make sure that you hear all of that as best as you can. I see that there is some testimony that's been provided already. I suspect that there may be more. As other people surface, even beyond this meeting date, it would be important for the subcommittee to have access to that information. If there's written material that comes in, I'd like to make sure that you avail yourselves of that as well. So all of these groups will have an enormous challenge of just being able to kind of go through this, cut through it, get to the bottom, and create at least, as I say, a reasonable and reasoned set of recommendations. So with that in mind, I wish you well. I'll stay for a few minutes and just hear the initial part of the conversation, and I'll get up.
Thank you for joining us this morning. I'd like to just begin, before we invite our testimony, to acknowledge that the timeline is short, and I know that scheduling these meetings is a challenge, but I also know that it's a great opportunity to move forward on some work that many, many smart people have been working on for a very long time. I'd also like to appreciate and thank the organizations that are working together to put together the empirical research information and practitioner information, and working together to refine some of the recommendations that come forward. They're not always a consensus, that's okay, but I think the more people we have involved in the dialogue before recommendations come here, the more people we have vetting the ideas. And you know, we are fortunate in education. There's a lot of research out there, and a lot of really smart people in this state who've read the research and have been working really hard to ensure that we are doing best practice wherever possible. So it's in that spirit that I know all of the testimony will come forward, whether it's written testimony or oral testimony that we have today. So our first part of testimony will be from the community college stakeholder organizations, and I have several names in front of me, but I'm not sure if you're all intending to do this at one time or one at a time. So David, you're first on my list here from AFT.
Okay. Actually, I want to sit as a member of the subcommittee. I was on that committee that drafted for AFT, but I think I'll just comment as we go through the list of recommendations, if that's okay.
Okay. How about from...
excuse me, David, this is Kate Duran. Could I have your last name?
David Reeves.
Oh, Reeves. Okay, I didn't know which David it was. Hello,
sorry.
David.
AFT didn't send a representative today because I think that the recommendations in the papers speak for themselves pretty clearly, so I'll discuss those along with the other recommendations from the other groups.
Okay. How about from OEIC, Jim Salt?
Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Start with a quick introduction, but first I should say I'm not a morning person, and I had to get up, drive up here from Eugene this morning, so if I hope I can make some sense this morning. My name is Jim Salt, and I'm a sociology instructor at Lane Community College. I earned my PhD in sociology from the University of Oregon, and I taught at Lewis and Clark College for several years, and then I was at the University of Tampa, which is a private college, and I not only wasn't big on Florida, but I also wanted to get back to Oregon and back to the public sector. And I'm here today in my capacity as president of the OEA Community College Council, which is represents the faculty and staff locals at 10 community colleges across the state, and almost 4,000 members. I also happen to be president of the faculty local at Lane Community College, and some capacity representing them as well. I've been teaching the sociology of education for a number of years. In fact, it was the first course I ever taught, and the relationship between social inequality and education is for those of you that know the field, it's a fundamental subject in the study of sociology. And so I say that because my reaction to my approach to this, to the Achievement Compact plan as it currently stands is largely informed from that perspective, not simply from the perspective of sort of a union representative. And I think you'll probably see that in some of the remarks. I assume that you've received copies of the document that we provided back in September.
Yes, they're in everyone's packets, as well as there were links that were attached to the email notice for folks for the
great. It's a 2-page document. Looks like this without all the little notes on it, of course. Thought what I do is just kind of work through it quickly and hit some high points, and then happy to answer any questions, of course, that you may have. The report that you'll see really has 2 sections. The first section are a set of principles that we think ought to guide any educational reform effort, in particular one focusing on increasing college completion rates in Oregon. And I want to hit a couple of those highlights first. One of the things that we look at when looking at the current plan is that it almost fetishizes attainment rates, right? Completion goals. It's called an Achievement Compact, but it doesn't say anything about educational achievement. It's all about educational attainment. And so we've recommended that future editions should be broadened. We don't want to exclude attainment, but it ought to focus on those more qualitative components of educational goals, such as those that are already codified in Oregon law. I'm going to read you my favorite one. This is ORS 351-001, paragraph 6. It says, "For the personal well-being, individual Oregonians need to cultivate an advanced literacy essential to leading productive and rewarding lives. This includes the capacity to think logically and critically, to internalize and exemplify human values, to write, speak, figure clearly and accurately, to understand in some depth a variety of psychological, historical, cultural, aesthetic, and scientific concepts and theories, and to master a range of occupational, professional, avocational, social, and personal skills." I mean, where are those kind of goals captured in the achievement compacts that focus on, on credentials and certificates? That's missing in it, and the threat would be that we, sometimes you get what you aim for, and if we focus on credentials rather than what education is really about, then we maybe sell the latter short. The second concern we have is that there doesn't appear to be a close correlation between the educational goals rooted in the 40-40-20 vision and the jobs that are either currently available or even projected to be available, by the state. If I'd had more warning about this meeting, I would have provided documents with me. What I'll do is I'll send them to you instead. But put together a table that took the data from the most recent Oregon economic report, looking at job projections, and compared them with the 40-40-20 goal, where we are now, and so forth. And the job openings that are projected currently are expected, about 35% are expected to have a college degree, 19% some post-secondary training, and in the remaining 46% some work-related experience. That's not that far off from the college degree, 35 versus 40, but some post-secondary training, 19% versus the 40%. That's more than 2 to 1. People have already been raising the concern about the percentage of students that are completing school and not able to find jobs. Obviously, we want to be able to attract good jobs to Oregon. We need an educated workforce to do so, but we also need some connection between those two sets of figures. And there appears to be a larger gap than we think there should be. A third concern, and this related more to my point about being a sociologist, concerns with this, is the method for pursuing these goals seems to be solely focused upon this idea that we can just set goals and leave people to figure it out themselves up how to do it. Maybe we'll learn from one another. We establish things called best practices, and that's going to move us forward. So that's the strategy. There is no, from what I've seen in any of this, social scientific analysis of why we are where we are as a state at any level in the educational system, and therefore, there's no review of the literature. With a vast decades-long literature on educational attainment. There's no analysis of data in Oregon to, why are we where we are in particular places. And therefore there are no theoretically or empirically informed strategies to move there. Again, just this simplistic method, just to do it, right? Pick a number, go for it, figure it out, right? That's not a strategy for success. This needs to be informed by and rooted in this long tradition and history of analysis and an Oregon data and have informed strategies. Similarly, is another. We shouldn't be overestimating efficacy of schools to simply be able to identify a target and to hit it. In part because we shouldn't exaggerate the efficacy of schools in period. Obviously, we're very important institutions. They're what we're all here to help fix. They're what we dedicate our lives to, probably everybody in this room. But that doesn't mean that we can just change the world by ourselves. There are other components that are absolutely essential, one of which, the next set of points, has to do with state funding. To come in at this particular period in time where we've seen significant cuts in community college funding, and at the same time had this huge enrollment surge at Lane. I think our numbers are up 45%. I don't know what the state figure is, but I would assume that that's probably fairly consistent. And we've risen to the occasion to make that happen through tremendous sacrifices in a variety of ways, economically, in terms of class size, holding positions open, hiring a lot more part-time faculty instead of full-time permanent faculty positions. We've met that demand. To come in now and to say that we have to do far more with no more resources and maybe even fewer resources is a strategy for failure. I'm going to skip some of the others, and you can read them, on your own. So I can.
Jim, this is Kate Tran. I have a question to ask you. You were talking about the need for strategies to achieve the goal, and that there's a need for analysis and recommendations and conclusions. Who do you think should be responsible for developing those strategies? And the reason I ask that question is because you're aware that we have this conversation around tight, loose all the time. So I'd like to hear what your thinking is about that.
Yeah, who should develop it? I think we get to this point towards the end of the two-page document here, where what we call for is a gathering of and establishing of a group of representatives of the different levels of post-secondary education in the state. Maybe it should be the entire educational system to develop that collaboratively, rather than a sort of this top-down approach, this introduction of a business model that comes to us via Salem, and then jumps all the way down to the local level. That we need state bodies and organizations that have been dealing with these issues to develop that. So I don't want to offer a particular new structure, let alone a particular set of strategies, but it has to be collaborative. And frankly, up to this point, nothing about this has been collaborative. And everybody who comes to the meetings observes that it seems to be just there's an approach is presented, critics come up, they say their concerns, we're told thank you very much, and then it just moves forward as is with no changes. Bring people together. We have the expertise in the state. Bring people together, and we will develop those strategies.
Thank you.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
As a new person coming into the state, I'm curious as to how, given that there was no structure like this before, and you're essentially arguing, as I hear it, that it needs a more scientific, or if you will, socio-scientific base of research to go forward. how do you explain why you haven't done it in the past? I mean, why hasn't the system galvanized around some of these issues, fixed them before any sense of urgency came from, as you say, Salem or anyplace else?
I think this is going to answer the question. It may seem indirect. I think we should see this as an opportunity to have that question is being raised in a good way. I'm not in a position to go back and why it hasn't happened. It's kind of explaining the negative. It's hard to do so. With the goals being raised the way that they have and the achievement compact plan being developed, it's raised a good question, and it's brought us together. I think that if we address some of the issues that our the OEIB thinks are lacking, then we'll be in a position to begin to address those weaknesses. So please, I hope this isn't received simply as criticism of the work.
No, not at all.
And Dr. Crew, I'd just like to add, some of this, there is the completion agenda for post-secondary that's been around several years now. But this is a rather recent development, really, in post-secondary. The state wanting standards and outcomes to be met at that level. And I think post-secondary has worked on those things, but in its own realm. Whether it's with the accreditation agencies, the professional associations, or within the departments and the institutions themselves. And I think what we're trying to do here is, what Jim's suggesting is we do have the facilities for that, but just maybe respect that and have the state help organize something along those lines that we can contribute.
Yeah, I was gonna Elaine, we've got more projects going on right now to promote completion than I can literally keep track of. It's not that schools haven't been doing it. It hasn't been done at the state level, I think. And that's what I think we need, a sort of coordinating commission, whatever the best framework for it is to be able to link the schools together. Because if you just send it, I mean, if schools are treated like peasants, right, out in the field, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but the individual farmer, trying to grow their own crops, we're not gonna accomplish the goal.
I just wanted to raise one other comment. Obviously, community colleges in the world I'm most familiar with, but I do see now an opportunity of continuing convening, not only at the level of community college, but then across the level, so that we get those vertical opportunities to address some of the barriers that have been there in the past, so that we can work collaboratively across K-12 to community college and so on, up each level, to make sure that we're working together on those things. And before the OEIB, there really wasn't a mechanism for helping us do that. So I do want to acknowledge that we're really inventing this process as we go. So we do appreciate the recommendations. Thank you. Okay. Andrea Henderson, and you're from OCCA, and we do have your document as well.
Well, thank you. Good morning. Andrea Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Community College Association. And OCCA represents the 17 colleges. And I report to a board that's both board members and presidents from each of the 17 colleges. And we work to really develop collaborative positions between the 17 colleges, both on legislative and other areas. So I'd like to talk a little bit about response from the board members and the presidents and other administrators regarding the achievement compacts. First, we've had the opportunity to have a great deal of conversation about the achievement compacts. When the OEIB started this process, the Oregon President's Council did convene a group to look specifically at the achievement compacts that comprised both board members, presidents, institutional researchers, instructional administrators, and student service administrators to really talk through what might be in the compact and what are the best things to put in there to reflect the work of community colleges. I think we were very fortunate in the work in that we had already started a conversation about outcomes in community colleges and have been working to make the transition in community colleges from being focused on access as our highest priority to really look at student success, persistence, and completion as a critical component of our mission, and trying to change how we talk about things to really focus on that student completion. It's part of, I think, a national effort of work for community colleges that recognizes that we need to do a better job with our students and helping them to complete than we have been in the past, and trying to really look at our structure in community colleges, how we function as community colleges, to make sure that we are doing a better job. To do that, with the leadership of Karen Cordes, our commissioner, community colleges started a process about 4 years ago to look at student success, and formed a student success committee that had representatives from throughout the community college world to really develop recommendations to focus on that student success, and have used that for the last several years as our framework for what we need to do to increase our completion rates. And so we were able to take that work and pull some of the recommendations from that to help us craft an achievement compact that reflects what we think is best, both to categorize what the outcomes are for our students, including certificates and associate degrees and transfer, but also what are the important points along the way in terms of students accomplishing their first 15 credit hours, their first 30 credit hours, moving from developmental ed into college level work, and really trying to capture what's important for community colleges. So we're able to do that, to provide recommendations to the OEIB in terms of what might be in the compacts. We did identify several areas as we were going through this work last year that we still needed to do, and have been continuing that work to bring back some recommendations, specifically on 2 areas that we do want to include in the compacts. One is a recognition of what we termed last year programs of study, but have further developed that. To really recognize those students that come to community colleges that aren't seeking a degree. They don't want to transfer, they don't need a certificate or an associate's degree, but they do need some specific workforce skills to help them either get a new job or to keep the job that they have. A perfect example of that might be someone that needs to take 2 accounting courses so that they can move up within their company. And so somehow to recognize that as a success and to be able to count that. So we do have a committee that is doing some work. It's not quite finalized yet, but we hope that it will be in the next couple of weeks. But essentially what we want to do is to really term that workforce readiness and advancement, and count the number of students that do come in for very specific workforce courses, and show that we are meeting those needs and increasing the number of students that come in and complete and can take those important courses so that they can either keep or retain their job or to get that new job or that new promotion. The second area that we had noted last year as being kind of under development, that we just didn't have the resources yet to put into Achievement Compact, was some way to show that students who have graduated either got a new job or did get that promotion and somehow match the employment data back to what we did. And so work is being also done to define how we can take the number of students who complete a certificate or achievement compact and then take their employment data and match it up so we can show that either that yes, they do have a job now and count that as a success, or they have an increase in their salaries, because many of our students are employed while they're going through college, so we need to be able to show that yes, they had a job, they now are making significantly more money, and that's a result of the certificate or the associate's degree they received from us. For those particular students, we want to create essentially a smaller universe, so it's not all of our students, but those that actually get a career or technical certificate or degree. So we'd weed out those that are transferring onto the university at this point, but really focus on those students. So some very specific recommendations on those, once we get that finalized, will be brought to you so that we can hopefully add that into the next round of achievement compacts.
Did you say you'll have recommendations on both of those?
Yes, on both of those. So it's we just had our conversation Thursday with the Oregon President's Council to talk about that, and there's a few adjustments that need to be made, so it's not quite ready for this morning, but certainly in time for if there's an interest in including it in the next round of Achievement Compact, so it can be in there by the December 1st deadline.
Yes. True.
Yes.
Whenever I hear this distinction, and I agree with the distinction of developmental courses versus people who are essentially taking the accountant class for being able to move up or even go into a new job, versus those people who are pursuing a degree program or certification and therefore want to transfer to a four-year institution. What comes to my mind is, I'm wondering, when you say recognize them, are they recognizable in all the same weight in your mind? I mean, is the group thinking about these in some distinctly different way, or is there some stratification thereof?
I think from community colleges, I think one of our fundamental values is that we are comprehensive community colleges, and we're there to help the needs of each community in which the community college serves. And so for each person in that community is whatever their needs are, and they're all equal needs. So whether it's someone that does need just that one class, someone that needs to transfer to a university, someone that needs a very specific career and technical degree, those are all important needs. And so it's really focused on that individual and what that individual needs. And I think it's really embedded in a philosophy that our goal is to help people where they are, move them forward to wherever that goal is. And that goal is personalized to that person. It's reflected in many of our colleges as you look at their mission statements. That kind of value is reflected in their mission statements, that they help people achieve their dreams and help them move forward to the next stage in their life, whatever that might be. So I think they're all equal.
May I just follow? And I guess I totally agree with that. I don't in a normal context, were the world right, I would say that's exactly the right thing and certainly the right mission, and I have no problems with it whatsoever. But we're now sitting here forced to try to figure out from among them, what's first among equals, right? And the emphasis thus far has been on, at least the conversation about this, has been on degree completion, right? So if you were, I mean, I understand people don't want to go down this road, right? So this is like going to the dentist, But to the extent that you can shape some thoughts around, well, if you have to sort of move in a direction that helps to prioritize and give some weighted value one over the other, it gets out of this, sort of everything is as equal as everything else. What would your committee or your group be thinking about as it relates to sort of this, order of these things?
So to answer that question, I'm going to reframe it just a little bit. Because I think as we look at it, I think first of all, we recognize there's not enough money to do everything that we need to do in community colleges. And so how do we move forward? How do we make sure that we're serving the needs of Oregonians who need to come to us, given that we have limited resources? And frankly, we know we're not going to get the money that we need to do what it is that we want to do. I think as we look at how we can best do that, it's to help our students complete and finish. And so I don't think we would prioritize one need over the other in terms of someone who just needs 3 classes from accounting as to someone who needs a career technical degree or someone who wants to transfer. I think what we can do, though, is do a better job when those students come to us so that they're not taking too many classes to complete. That helps with our resources so we can redirect them elsewhere. Our colleges are doing creative innovation with their school districts to help with the remediation issue so that when students come to us from K through 12, they don't need as much remediation. That helps save money. How do we move students through so that they're only taking the classes they need, so that their program, the classes they choose are exactly the right classes that they need. They're not taking 120 credits when they only need 90 credits. That can help save money and help move the system forward. Moving students out of remediation faster is another large effort that we're working on because that is going to help students succeed as well. And there's many ways that we can do that is a matter of restructuring what we do rather than choosing to leave someone out. It's doing a better job of how we are actually organized, where our focus is, really putting that emphasis on student services. Some specific example that colleges are working on. The research shows, for example, that students that register late tend not to do well. And so one of the tough decisions our colleges are making is to cut off late registration. Because those students tend not to succeed in the courses. They're wasting their money. They're taking a seat that perhaps could be used by someone else. It's just not a good use of resources. So that's helping to save money there and to be more efficient for students. Research also shows that if students can take a student success course at the beginning of their college career that helps them navigate college, that they will do better. That's a good use of money, and it saves students from going down the wrong path that's not helpful to them. So I think if we really focus on those type of strategies first, so we do a better job with what we have, rather than choosing to leave anybody out.
I have a question since you brought up remediation coming from the K-12 world. How much coordination is currently being done with the K-12 world? I just heard some unbelievable statistics about the percentage of kids that are coming from our high schools, some valedictorians passing AP classes, but getting to the community college and being completely cut out from even applying to classes because they don't pass a particular test. And so I know that in the K-12 world, we've had our own challenges with lining up assessments, but how much work has been done in coordinating that?
I would say the whole remediation, developmental ed area in community colleges is probably one of the areas where we need the biggest work, in multiple areas. And the work is not done. This is a national problem. It's not unique to Oregon. There is research that's coming out all the time in terms of how we can do it better. We don't have all the answers yet, and frankly, we need to find the answers because it's not working. We have the problem of students that they come out of high school and come to the community colleges and test into remediation. Considerable work still needs to be done between community colleges and high school to line that up so that we can avoid that as much as possible. The second huge issue that we have is students that test into remediation many times never come out of it, and how we can provide better tools for them and better ways to look at it so that they do succeed, rather than just getting stuck there and never actually achieving their goals. For example, one of our colleges over in Central Oregon is working on a program that's taking their remedial math and really chunking it down to help students succeed and get out of it, so it no longer becomes a barrier, but rather that we're providing the assistance to them to actually move forward. Frankly, we don't have all the answers yet. It's for our Council of Instructional Administrators this year. It's their top priority to work on developmental ed and to figure out different strategies. And it's a national problem. Everybody is focusing on it, and we will find ways to do it better.
I would just like to say that I know that there's interest in the K-12 world working together on that, because it feels like we're doing the same work, and we should have them prepared so that you don't have to remediate.
Yes. So a few other comments from our community college boards in terms of their process as they looked at developing the achievement compacts over the last year. We did have a very specific conversation with the OCCA board and asked local boards to talk about their experiences and kind of share some reflections that we could then share with you. And some of their comments, one, I think there's still some from the board perspective, they'd like to have greater clarity in terms of what the purpose of the compacts are. I think there's, as board members talk, they have many different ideas of what the purpose of the compact is. I don't think we've kind of landed yet at a shared understanding of what the compacts are supposed to be, what's the role of the local board, what's the role of the OEIB, and what's the role of that partnership between the two. And I think that's probably something that's just going to take some more time and some very deliberate attention to being very clear around that so that there is that shared understanding. And as that shared understanding is developed, I think they really want to see the compacts as being a mutual compact, that it's not just specific outcomes that the college will achieve, but it's looking both at what is the role of the OEIB to help move the state forward to accomplishing the 40-40-20, as well as the role of the local board and that college to achieve it. And that there's a clear understanding on both parties in terms of what their roles are, what the expectations are. And so I think further conversation to help develop that would be very helpful. They also want to be clear that the compacts should be seen really as a living document that needs to be adapted and changed each time as we go through it, as we learn more about what works and what doesn't work in the compacts. That it never be considered something that's finalized and done, and here is the compact and you will fill out this form every year. But that we continue to look at it each time, change the metrics if they need to be changed, add metrics if they need to be added, take some away if they need to be taken away, but really focus on what works and continuing to let them evolve so that they're the most effective tool possible. And they really did talk about it in terms of the Achievement Compact should be viewed as a tool. They're not the, because you have an Achievement Compact and everything is perfect. It really is a tool for the conversation that needs to occur about a student's success and completion, and how to really focus the institution and the state on those goals. And that this is just a tool to make that happen. And without the rich conversations and the data and the work behind it, it really doesn't mean anything. It's about the work that needs to be done and really kind of capturing that work. And lastly, they are concerned that there not be any attempts in the future to tie funding specifically to the Achievement Compacts, that the Achievement Compacts should be an area that's focused on that shared responsibility and the work that we need to do, and that there be other mechanisms by which we look at the funding structures in the state, but they not be tied directly to the Achievement Compacts, and the compacts be separate from that. And to that end, the presidents have started a conversation around our distribution model in community colleges, and essentially asking the question, is our distribution model that we currently have the best way to support our goals of student success and achievement? Because our distribution model is focused essentially on access, and we count the number of students that come in the door. And is that okay? Is that a barrier to student success and achievement? And if it is a barrier, then how might our formula look so that we can be sure that our funding mechanisms align with our values and align with our strategies? And so that's really the question that's being asked right now amongst the presidents to see if there aren't other recommendations that we could bring forward to perhaps do that differently. With that, I will stop there and answer any other questions you might have.
Yeah, I like your comments about making the compacts more of a partnership or a mutual agreement. I think that ties in with Jim Salt said too about getting representatives from post-secondary to work together, whether in a task force or commission or something, to really look at what we want in these compacts and what we can be working for. And I think that would be a good development. Just two comments on some of the things previously said. I'm a little bit worried about tying employment or increases in salary just without any other variables taken into account. So if we were to go in that direction, I would hope there'd be some kind of variables taken into account, just other than how many people are getting jobs, especially immediately upon graduation. I know sometimes we don't see the effect for a few years, whether it's a promotion or a better job, particularly for people in lifelong learning, I'd say, rather than just somebody that's young and just graduating. And I think you made a very important point about student goals and personal goals, and I'd like to know if the colleges are doing anything right now to look at that and take some of that into account, because I think that's the difference we're seeing here between K through 12 and post-secondary. Post-secondary is adult learning, and adults have a lot more responsibility for their individual learning than they do when they were in high school. And I think there has to be some way that that's taken into account and encouraged, that students take that responsibility and set those goals and make sure those goals are clear. I think that it would help their path in post-secondary a lot too. So I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Well, with our students, particularly in setting goals, when our students come in the door, I mean, we do ask them what they would like to achieve, and can do a little bit of tracking around that, but it's it's not as specific as it needs to be. And secondly, our students change their goals. And that's, I think, one of the wonderful things about community colleges is students walk in the door and they may have a goal to take one class. And they realize, oh, I can go to college. I can do this. And then they switch their goal to, maybe I want to get the certificate. And they take a few more classes. And they say, I want to get my AA degree. And then they realize, well, I can get my bachelor's. And so they change their goals as they learn what they can do. And that's a very important part of community colleges as well. The college has been working for several years now to develop career pathways that can help students do that, so they can identify a specific career pathway where they can come in, take a few classes and see, okay, I can get this job. Well, then I can come back to the college and take these classes, get this certificate, and I can get, the next level in my career. And it's all aligned, so all their credits count. And that's really important for students as well. And in terms of your comment about employment, when we bring forward a recommendation, it will have more specifics around it, and will need to be limited really to those students who complete as a certificate or a AA degree in a career technical field, so it's not all students. And then we can look at their employment data and how that may have improved. So hopefully can get that narrowed down with some specifics around it so it becomes a meaningful measurement.
I like this notion of understanding the mutuality among the partners. What's a constant sort of struggle for me is around the issue of community college outcomes, if you will, K-12 handoff. So this transition coming in, if I were just looking at this straight according to, the numbers, so to speak, I would say, we typically don't do a very good job at that, what you call developmental remedial level. People coming in, trying to start, and it's a staggered start at best in many cases. Partly driven by skill and partly driven by a loss of confidence. How do you feel about, in my mind, one of the purposes of the compact, and again, I'm new here, but one of the purposes of the compact really was to create a container within which these conversations would be mutual. That there would be some attention and focus and some guided practice that would be aimed directly at very, very particular, very specific problems. And we would count results. We would keep track of the score, right? So when I hear the sort of this issue of mutuality, are you including K-12 in that sense of mutuality? In other words, are you talking directly, or do the presidents see themselves as talking directly with superintendents as a way of beginning to sort of start where the benchmarks are and where they should be and so forth? Or is this mutuality essentially, should I hear it as this is between the state and my institution, and it's just sort of a one-dimensional relationship?
I think as we talk about mutuality and partnership, I would define that in the broadest sense possible. And I think, particularly in the community college world, I think this is something that we've done very well in terms of the partnership between the community colleges, the partnership between community colleges and their school districts, and I think the partnership between how CAM's office at CCWD works with the colleges. And it is around that notion of partnerships. I think there's always ways that we can improve and do it better. I think in terms of looking specifically, as you mentioned, the intersection between K through 12 and community colleges. I think there's been tremendous work that's been done at the State Board of Education over the last several years because they've focused on this, and they do have authority over both the community colleges and K through 12. It's far from being done. But I can look at where we were 5 years ago and look at where we are now and look back and say, yes, we've made tremendous improvement. We're not done. I think everybody realizes we're not done, and that work needs to continue. I think the colleges at the local level have done tremendous partnerships with their local school districts. And those partnerships look different in each community because each community's needs are different, and they've come up with some really wonderful ideas about how to share resources and make things work between them. I think there's more work that can be done at the state level to take some of those wonderful examples out there and move them to scale and share them with other districts so that it can be done. Partnerships around career technical education so that school districts who can't offer those classes can have their students come to the community colleges. We have partnerships where community college faculty go into school districts and teach, where K through 12 are brought into the community college, where there are that shared pieces. But we're not done. I mean, we have so much further to go, and I think ways in which the state can help leverage those partnerships and help make them happen is really the next level of work. I think in community colleges, the way we've approached it is that the 17 colleges collectively have worked very well together to try to forward these forward. And really, as the colleges come up with innovations, CCWD has done just this absolutely fabulous job of helping colleges bring those to scale, move those innovations forward, and find these ways to partnership. Through CCWD's leadership and the collaboration between the colleges have brought in, over the last couple of years, about $36 million in grants from various foundations to help with this work because of these partnerships that they've developed. So I think the foundation is there. I think it's really a matter of looking at where are the specific ways in that foundation where we're not doing as good of a job, and what can the state do to help leverage us as part of that partnership to move us forward. Because there still is a tremendous amount of work that does need to be done.
Okay, I'm going to thank you and ask that we move on. Looking at the clock, I know we started a bit late. Thank you, Andrea, very much.
Thank you.
And next we have Elizabeth Cox-Brand from CCWD. Speaking of CCWD.
Well, and I included you on the agenda, Elizabeth, since you and I had talked about some of the research basis, but I didn't know if you wanted to just begin that conversation today, or if we wanted to.
Can we table it? I wasn't prepared to speak on anything today.
Okay, so we'll hold off on that.
We'll just wait for next time. How about any other conversation amongst the members of the committee or support staff? Questions? Dr. Crew?
No, just an observation, I guess. I'm listening to this with relatively fresh ears in terms of how people feel about, and particularly at the community college, how people feel about compacts. And I'm juxtaposing that against, you know, what everyone would probably suggest, or at least argue, you know, we're not there yet. You know, we're not where we want to be yet. And so I'm trying to get to a bit more of the, you know, sort of the strands of this problem that are, in fact, workable. And how to, this isn't going to go away, right? So I don't see this as being a abort the mission, let's not do it anymore, bad idea, end of story. I don't see that happen. So the question becomes, how do you shape it, right? So I was listening, and I am listening for, well, what ties to what here? I mean, I was asking about the superintendents being in this because I think that there is a nexus there that we miss. There's an opportunity to start looking at hard data, you know, really looking at the analytics of who's leaving school in what condition as they come into a community college, and then what do we do? And what succeeds and what doesn't succeed? What seems to have higher priority over what, over the other, by program model, right? I think we know that information. I don't think that this has to be subjected to a year-long of, you know, of intense research. I think that there's enough information about that to know that. That's a knowable thing. But I don't necessarily, you know, I don't personally know it, but I know it's known in the field. So scaling, for example, would be something that I would think the state would have a real interest in, right? How do you bring this to scale, right? When I asked the question about, you know, this linkage, even to the world of work, you know, it's one thing to see a student get out with a degree or a certification, and but now they got to go through the task of actually trying to find work. So where are we in that, in the building of that scaffolding for a student to then move with their degree in hand directly into the world of work? Are we bridging with business? Are we bridging with the outside world? Are we bridging with the online world? I mean, you've got some major, Fortune 500 companies around here that could easily be a part of, that envelope. So I keep looking for ways by which to actually shape this so that the next iteration actually answers the bell of some of the things that the first one didn't. But the impulse of the first one, as I hear it, was to force the system, to jumpstart it, to overcome the inertia. I've been amazed. You're right. The community colleges, the 17 community colleges, do a really, really bang-up job together. It's when I start asking about the outside of this that it becomes episodic, right? Some superintendents, some communities, some regions, yes. Others, no. Some university presidents, others, no. So you've got this sort of, mixed world here that for any purpose, be it financial or educational, won't work. It won't work. It's not sustainable.
David, did you want to make any more comments? You thought you might at the end.
Yeah, I think Dr. Crew, what we're seeing is there is a real desire in post-secondary to try and come together and really talk about that. I don't think it's going to come from any one group or any one set of completion goals, and I think that's what I'm really glad to see the conversation starting. We had a convocation in Eugene earlier in summer. There's about 100 people turned out to that, spent a whole afternoon. There's faculty, there's staff, there are administrators, board members, a few presidents. I think really wanting to get involved in the conversation. And I think it really hasn't been mapped out that clearly in post-secondary. There are so many different streams of what we're doing. It's not just completion. There's research, there's community service, there's workforce training, there's developmental education, and they're all important. And I think people really want to get involved to make sure all those are respected, and we're doing them, if, as you say, in the right priorities with tight funding. But I think it's going to be something coming from a conversation that people have to get involved in. It's a lot of the way the post-secondary world works too. It's not just the, I don't think it's hierarchical as some other organizations in that regard. There's a long tradition of faculty governance at universities and at community colleges. And I think we have to make sure everybody has their voice heard in this, but I think there is a real desire among the post-secondary community to make sure students are succeeding. And I think it is going to take a little time to, it's going to be a little bit messier than just one person at the top saying do this or do that. But I think it'll be a lot more valuable if we come together and agree on what our priorities are and how we're going to get there. And I think as Andrea said, it's going to be a little bit developmental as we go along. But I think there's some alternatives in other states with very top-down ideas that aren't really being received very well, nor I think they're being carried out very well post-secondary, whether they're just strictly degree requirements and nothing else. But I think we really stand a chance if we get people involved here, and we are going to have to set up some kind of structure in my viewpoint. So,
David, I was just going to ask a question about that. Do you see that as OEIB's role to call together that structure?
Ultimately, yes. I think with the achievement compacts and the stress on involving the K through 12 community, or it may just be having, maybe an existing organization that could better carry it out, but I think OEIB should see that it's done if we're really talking in the context of 0 through 20. I think some of these things I've seen, and we're going to be talking about K through 12 compacts next, is there are already a lot of efforts underway. Sometimes they're more local than they are statewide. Sometimes they're more well known than sometimes they're not so well known. And I think we can take a lot of that into account. We don't have to be reinventing the wheel.
I'm just trying to figure out the balance. It seems like on one hand I hear the request to let schools figure it out and let levels figure it out in sort of an organic way and not be top down, and then I also am hearing that we want a top-down sort of mandate that we convene these groups and get this work done. So I'm trying to figure out where the balance is and what the role, being that this is our first meeting of this committee, trying to figure out the role of this committee in relationship to OEIB, the board itself, and the department, and how we can move the work along. Because I know that many of us are a little impatient with the idea it's going to take time because we're losing kids. So I think that the sense of urgency is there not just because of our economic situation, but because we see our kids in front of us every day that need levels of success. And I'm just going to call out two things that I'm going to trust that we continue to do, and that is to continue to look at getting better and better with the achievement compacts. I don't even think anyone thought we would ever be able to measure at the beginning everything that we thought was valuable. I know K-12 feels like that. I know we have the same conversations in K-12, and I don't know how you measure every single thing we think is important in education, but there are things that we can get better at either measuring or describing as here's what success looks like. And I think I heard a little bit of that in the comments we were talking about, that if we continue talking together, we can describe what it is we want to achieve and then have some way of determining how close we're getting to that, even in those more qualitative pieces. So I'm just going to hope that that's what we continue to work on. I'm going to move us forward to testimony around the K-12 achievement compacts, but before I do, I just want to mention that at the next meeting, which I know is on the 7th, it would be great if you could get information to Margie if you want to give testimony on very specific changes to the compact, because as was mentioned, they're not going to go away. That's not within our responsibility or authority to recommend that they go away, but instead to bring recommendations of how we can continue to improve the achievement compacts. So,
Yvonne, could I just add one piece? I just want to acknowledge too, and I want to thank several people who are here who have been helping me over the last month or so to really have a better understanding of some of the initiatives that we've been alluding to, and they have been impressive initiatives. These are not little pieces, but when I look at the impact of, for example, the CASE grant, $18.6 million, that's impacting every single institution. I really am hoping that one of the things that happens out of this focus on achievement compacts, and I remember what Thoreau used to say about if you don't aim high, then you don't achieve anything of notability there. So when I look at some of those pieces around credit for prior learning, when I look at the pieces around the career pathways and the career coaches, I start to see how the structure across systems is going to help us communicate these pieces so much better to students that are not aware of what a career pathway is yet in K-12. Right. I mean, I got excited when I looked at Preston's nice little chart that he has that any student could pick up and understand what this actually means for me. And it even spells out an hourly wage, which is going to be attractive. We got to think like kids sometimes and realize why they're not accessing information and figuring this out and navigate those. So I'm pretty excited about the work that we can do as a system beyond just the ACs, but to really look at sharing of these ways of communicating and really elevating some of the work that I'm seeing that's underway. Thank you for letting me share that.
Great, that's good news. All right, I'm going to move forward to the K-12 conversation, and I believe Craig Hawkins will be giving testimony on the K-12 Achievement Compact. Thank you. Recommendations. And we also have that document in front of us.
Margie, do you have the one-pager that we had at the off-the-record meeting?
I did not include that in the package.
I've got copies. Is that okay?
Okay, that'd be great.
Great. That'd be great.
That's just to Doris. Okay, thank you. Maybe while those are going around, I'll mention a little bit about K-12 community college collaboration. It's underway. By the way, Craig Hawkins, Executive Director of Confederation of Oregon School Administrators, more commonly known as COSA. Cam Preuss and I have been working together for the last several weeks, putting together a PLC of community college presidents and superintendents to get to work on the conversations around the obstacles we have, the opportunities we have together. And before the end of the year, there'll be the first meeting of that group, 10 community college presidents, 10 superintendents coming together to try to take that broader statewide look at some of those successful initiatives that are happening in local spots and try to come to some broader agreement around how we move forward. So looking forward to that. You have two sets of recommendations that I'm going to talk about today. Primarily, I'm going to focus on the one-pager that I just handed out, but I'll talk also about the recommendations that came to you, to OEIB, in the last 30 days or so from OEA, OSBA, and COSA as well. But let's start with the one-pager. This document was created in the spirit of Achievement Compacts as evolving tools and documents, and done over a period of several months at several meetings between superintendents and also central office administrators and also principals. At the end of September, on the same day in 2 different locations, about 120 superintendents came together, so that represents well over half the districts in the state, and agreed on the list that you see before you. At the same time, central office administrators, so special ed directors, assessment, curriculum folks, and others, human resources folks, came together and had the same kind of conversation around the Achievement Compacts. And what's remarkable is that they came to essentially the same conclusions. I mean, there's very little difference between the two, even though they were 2 separate rooms in 2 separate places. And so that list reflects what both groups agreed were the right steps. And by the way, this is also shared subsequently with groups of our principal leaders, so about 25 to 30 principals from various districts around the state also feel good about this list. So I'll just go through them quickly if that's okay. The first one is move the submission date for compacts from June 30th to the fall. By the way, that was also supported by OEA and OSBA in the set of recommendations we did jointly. Now that change would take a statutory change. It's not as simple as you make that recommendation and it happens, unfortunately. But the reason that we think this one's really important is that it aligns with the data timing, so that we'll have data in hand, and also the planning processes that schools are accustomed to, the improvement planning processes. It just makes a lot of sense for that submission date to be at that point. Also, if, for example, a submission date is, say, early to mid-November, that aligns well with, you've developed your plan, your targets, aligns well with budget planning from there on as well. So a really strong recommendation there. I realize if you're supportive, we'd have to work together legislatively to make that happen. I'm going to point to the third bullet down, separate credits earned and attendance for 9th grade on-track measure. As you know, at this point in 9th grade, those 2 things are tied. And what district folks tell us is that makes it kind of a difficult tracking measure, difficult to put that data together in a way that makes a lot of sense. And so while they think both elements are important and should remain, I'd like to separate them so that there's a 9th grade measure around attendance and a 9th grade measure around credits earned, but they're not together. A lot of conversation about the 4th bullet among all of our groups, reducing the number of completion measures. Right now there are 3 on the compact. It seems like 3 that are somewhat the same thing. What's interesting is in the conversations, the 5-year completion rate and the 5-year graduation rate actually sort of have, the groups have more preference. It's somewhat split, people can make, you can make an argument for any of the three: 4-year graduation rate, 5-year graduation rate, 5-year completion rate. But I think in general, what you'll find is that superintendents and other administrators look at that and think that 40-40-20 is about degree attainment in large part, and in fact in the law it really doesn't talk about high school graduation. It talks about high school completion plus degree attainment. We think that in the spirit of the work we're going to do together on that 11-14 transition and so many other things, that 4-year graduation sort of piece is going to become more fluid, and that 5-year completion rate, 5-year graduation rate may make more sense. The next bullet is adding an academic measure in middle school. The strongest preference among our groups was for a writing measure, and simply because writing is such an important skill in terms of being prepared for college, and so and succeeding in college, and we believe that it's important that there is an academic piece in middle school in addition to the 6th grade attendance measure. The next bullet is one that I know has been subject to a lot of OEIB conversation around achievement compact advisory committees and the inclusion of parents. Our superintendents and other administrators would like to have the ability to include parents on their advisory committees, and so would recommend that. That too would take a statutory change. The following one is just a slight change in terms of the responsibilities for Achievement Compact Advisory Committee. It's again likely to take some sort of statutory and rule change. The next bullet around moving the elementary math measure from 3rd grade to 5th grade. Currently there's 3rd grade reading and 3rd grade math, and what superintendents and other administrators thought was that the responsibility would be better to be a shared responsibility across grade levels. That, of course, it'll take the entire elementary school to achieve both measures. It's got to work together, but they really like the concept of a real focus in 3rd grade on reading, a focus in 5th grade, therefore, for the entire elementary school on math. And I think it just makes more sense in terms of a shared responsibility sense at the elementary level. And then the last bullet, also one that was in the OEA, OSBA, and COSA recommendations, is just need some real time to really develop some clarity around purpose of achievement compacts, purpose of state report card, and honestly, a real alignment between all the improvement work that we do together and the reporting of that, so that the achievement compact, the report card, the continuous improvement plan, and other measures work together as opposed to feel like separate efforts. So we'd recommend that very strongly. The other things I'll just mention that were in the OEA, OSBA, and COSA set of recommendations, the joint ones, were that we aim some resources at ODE and OEIB to assist districts with target setting and technical support, manuals, resources. I'll say this, I know that at COSA we're going to be working with OEIB and ODE in the next, we're talking about very quickly, in the next week or so, around developing some recommendations related to target setting, and so we're looking forward to that effort. The other recommendation, or one of the other recommendations in the OSBA and OEA COSA set was to create on-site teams to provide assistance, and we thought that on-site teams could include COSA, OSBA, OEA, ODE, OEIB, just some joint teams that we go in where folks want some assistance related to achievement compacts, that we could come together and help to provide that. And then finally, and this point's important, and it ties to the point around sort of aligning and being clear around the purposes of achievement compacts, state report cards, and other improvement planning. Let's continue to focus on some mandate relief, some reduction in terms of the reports, the improvement processes, et cetera, that the school districts are required to go to wherever we can. We'd appreciate the ability to truly focus on the Achievement Compact as a real improvement driver in the system, and not be pulled in, well, it's a ton. I won't even throw a number because it would sound incredible, but we're pulled in lots of directions. K-12 is pulled in lots of directions in terms of reporting and planning around improvement or student achievement, et cetera, and where we can narrow that focus, be much appreciated by folks out there for sure. That's it, pretty simple. Any questions?
Questions of the committee? Dr. Kerr?
I'm sorry, I stepped out for a second, Craig, but I did just quickly, if you could just say a little bit about the reduction from 3 to 2, the number of completion measures.
Yeah, to us, Rudy, it just feels like there are a lot of things that are sort of trying to measure the same thing, very close to the same thing. The preference of our groups, and as I mentioned, more than half of districts represented in this conversation, so it's a lot, and consensus among us is that the 5-year completion rate and the 5-year graduation rate make more sense in a 40-40-20 grades 11-14 transition kind of setting. And so we just think allowing us to sort of narrow that focus would be helpful. Anytime you've got fewer targets, it's just beneficial.
Okay. One other thing. When we were just speaking with the community college representatives, this notion of mutuality came up, and I'm big on thinking about this as being a bigger kind of mutuality than just mutuality among the peers, right? And so I guess I would ask for just your sense of how do you, whether not even expressed in the compact themselves, but just this work is going to require people to talk across borders and to do work across borders in ways that have been unprecedented. And I see people being, a little reluctant to kind of, if it's been going if it's been going well in their region, that works fine, and people are sort of very comfortable with it. But if it isn't, it's a relatively new piece of work. So I guess the question is, how do you feel about this sense of mutuality being expressed, A, in the compact, and B, with some design in mind for being able to cause the convening of K-12 superintendents and community college superintendents?
Well, it's interesting you should mention that while you're out of the room. It's interesting that you should ask that question. I've been working with Cam Preuss, and we're endeavoring to set up a first PLC of community college presidents and superintendents. That'll happen before the end of the calendar year for sure. We've got 10 superintendents that we've identified. We could have had 50 or 60. I mean, everybody wanted into this conversation. And Cam's identified 10 community college presidents. And we're going to come together and in very much the spirit of a PLC and look at the obstacles and barriers we see collectively, the opportunities that we have together, look at what's working out there in various locations and what might apply with a statewide kind of focus. And we're planning to work together and develop a set of recommendations for how we move forward. Rob Saxton is in that conversation a little bit, and of course we would invite you to be obviously to be there as well. And we think we have a real opportunity here. I mean, one of the great things about OEIB and the Achievement Compact process is that it causes us to come together. And not that we weren't coming together in a local or even in some cases regional place, but we're really excited about the opportunity to come together and talk about that. How are we going to work together grades 11 to 14? How are we going to make this a truly fluid, flexible, really just the right experience kid by kid? And we're really excited about it and convinced that it's the right thing to do to bring folks together and begin to get after that work.
Would you feel comfortable if you had a metric that responded to, or that required, as a function of doing the work, required there being this kind of mutuality? In other words, you know, what you've described here as a 5th grade math score, right? Mm-hmm. So you're saying that that's because you want to have mutuality among the teachers. It's true. Or pre-K to grade 4, right? Yeah. Or 5 even, right? Mm-hmm. So would that principle not hold true also as it relates to a metric that now speaks to the mutuality among and between the community college sector and K-12? I
think it would. I mean, I actually think it's you know, it's certainly worth talking about more. But I can't see why we can't have, for example, achievement compact goals and targets in common. And that would apply K-12 with pre-K, K-12 with community colleges, K-12 with higher ed. All of us together. It just depends on where it fits and what we're after. But isn't that's what this whole effort is about, right?
I'm sure. Maybe one more observation. So let me tell you where my mind goes with this, and I wish that maybe I can get a chance to talk to some of these folks again. But so when I look at, I don't know, 80+ low-performing schools, focus or priority schools, mm-hmm. in a state this size, right, I immediately go to, well, where are they? What region of the state are they in? Mm-hmm. And then what are the resources in that region that could devote themselves to making sure that we don't have any more of those low-performing schools in that region, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then I say, well, now what are the chief impediments to those institutions actually working in concert? And that's why I was asking the question before. I don't see them, right? Other than it's just human will, right? So I don't see anything that's structurally blocking people from doing this, right? But a metric in my mind that would go to the heart of what I'm describing here as a possibility would be things like the 11 to 14, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
Number of kids that are actually early completers, etc. But also this issue of the elimination of or the reduction of low-performing schools in the region of that community college in that district. Right?
Sure.
And I would even include in that, for that matter, higher ed. Mm-hmm. Right? This is a place where if you're going to put shoulders to a wheel, it just seems to me to be logical to say, well, what are the shoulders that could be put to the wheel? Right. And you've got a university system, you've got a K-12 system, and you've got a community college system, all of whom have a vested interest in a non-remedial state.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, I maybe even go one step further, Rudy, and I know that you would go there, and it's about the involvement of parents and communities beyond the education right. sector in that conversation. I think that, you know, I mean, you know, the real obvious one for higher ed is teacher preparation, right? I mean, we've got some work to do in that regard, and we've got some work to do in administrator preparation as well, and support of new teachers and new administrators, and we all, I mean, you know, the various levels have really strong roles to play in all of that. I like the concept of you know, bringing resources together and expertise together to talk about how are we going to help lower performing schools. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's important that we do that regionally, and I also think it's important that we do it on a statewide level. For example, with community colleges, K-12 and higher ed, you know, if we can come to some consistency around what is truly college credit earned in high school, what's going to be acceptable to everybody, and those kinds of conversations, then it helps, and those are things that we need to, I think, come to agreement on at the state level, as well as, you know, some of the places where locally and regionally there have been some really great agreements and great efforts.
Another example would be, like we talk about kindergarten readiness and whose responsibility it is and where is it going to get measured. Same thing with college readiness. Yeah. So we've got an Oaks assessment that as a state we're saying that's the measure, and if kids pass it, they're ready, and then they go to community college or other colleges, and there's all these different assessments, and so we're not sure if we're in the K-12 preparing kids for the same targets. What are those targets? Right. And so that's another area where a metric could be created around not only what happens with dual credit kind of stuff, but then what happens with reduction of the need for remedial work, right?
Yep.
And I know it's not as easy as just measuring it, because we could find ways to go there quickly that wouldn't really be about students being more successful, but it's in those conversations about how are we measuring it, who's determining what we're measuring, and what is it we really want to prepare kids for. So I'm excited about the PLC. I think that could be a place to really start and grow that work. And I agree, it's important region, having been in 5 different districts in the state and being in remote regions as well as now in the Valley, small districts to large districts. I know that some work does have to be looked at regionally, because we have some very places where people are very separated from one another. But the problem with staying there is that we just get these promising practices in regional areas, and we don't duplicate the work and what people have learned, and also what people have committed to. In some of the regions where there's less resource, my experience has been there's more commitment to that working together, because it's sort of for survival. So there's lessons we can learn from that, right?
Absolutely.
That we can share across the state. So that's exciting. Exciting work. How about David?
Yeah, just 2 things. You mentioned some kind of best practice manuals or something. I hope that consults the quality education model, for example, that has a lot of best practices.
Yes, it does.
That I know, I don't think we've made a whole lot of mention at the OEIB to this point, but we really should be referring to. And second, I'm kind of struck, this is just my comment, but mostly directed towards post-secondary. You know, here comes K through 12. Says, well, we need a 5th grade thing. We've got to move the 3rd grade to math up to 5th grade, and we really need something academic at 7th grade. And you notice with post-secondary, there are some specifics and a lot of general recommendations, and I think that reflects the 2 different worlds there. That K through 12 is probably a little more used to this, looking at things as grade levels and a progression to high school completion, and a lot of it really is developing in post-secondary. I think a lot of departments are looking more outside their own department and seeing it as more of a global scale. So I think that also, just a comment there, but I think that kind of helps give the perspective on the 2 different worlds there as they're both coming to ideas about the achievement compacts.
Which I think will probably speak to what does this committee recommend, you know, in this first chance, knowing that we only have a short amount of time. Probably the more concrete recommendations where we know actually what it is we want to do about it would be one area, and another area might be about process, right? Yes. Recommending these collaborative processes. So we'll think about how to continue to work that. Anybody else from staff? Anyone questions?
I'm just wondering, Yvonne, if it would make sense if I could work with some of the representatives in a either one-on-one or in a smaller group type of setting to perhaps move from some of the more conceptual ideas that have come from the post-secondary sectors to, you know, more tangible ways in which that might be represented in next phases, or, you know, is that work premature at this point, or in order to move the conversation and for this to be an evolutionary process so that we gain some steps this year with preparation and legwork underway to advance for next steps in subsequent years. But I'm just feeling very much, because I get those calls and emails from stakeholders who are worried about the next round of compacts weekly, what is it that I could do as staff to help advance the work in the immediate as well as the long term?
Yes, I think that would be great for you to reach out to, especially where you know there is work happening. If you can help get that to language that we know definitely what we want to do here, whether it's with regards to achievement compact changes, if we get that specific, or as to processes we might recommend that we recommend to OEIB.
Yeah,
Does
and
make
that
sense?
recommendation could include some kind of formal group that could be
Thank you,
advising
Craig.
Margie.
Thank you.
Go along.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm also wondering too, around the ones, this is just because I'm new to this process of being the chair, on the statutory changes, those, how does that go to OEIB? Would we make recommendations to making those statutory changes?
Generally, yes, the subcommittee would do that. We're past the point in time in which the OEIB itself can propose statutory changes, but I think there are some bills that we know are currently underway that we could suggest this as a way in which to add that to legislation that might already have the right relating clauses.
Okay. Would you be able to do that as well? Get that information for us so we know where that's already happening?
I could work with Whitney, who probably has a pretty good gauge on, are there existing pieces of legislation that we know that are underway that we could look at this as a possible amendment to. And then I could also go back and look at what are our administrative rules and be looking at how we might amend those for those things that require rule change.
Because we have time for that.
Yes.
And so when you mentioned Whitney, I was also thinking about working with Whitney on any of the recommended changes that come from K-12 in relationship to the waiver. So thinking specifically about that graduation. I know you've talked to me about it a couple of times, but I forget what's allowable. And so to see whether we can make that change. And the other one that stands out in my mind that we still have some work to figure out would be the 7th grade writing. If that's something that we think wants to have happen and we don't have a state writing assessment this year for 7th grade, would we recommend that for the following year? And I was just wondering whether we'd want a different measure for this year, because we did talk about different measures. But
so I can offer up, perhaps for the next meeting, I can sort of go through the different recommendations and make some, give some options about the sort of way we can proceed in policy and in practice to you know, what your choices would be for moving forward.
I think that'd be really helpful, specifically on the K-12 one, if both Margie and Whitney could give this committee some concrete information about where we would be in those recommendations. And then as it pertains to community college, Margie, if you work with the members that you mentioned as well as staff to figure out what those next steps might be. Do you have any other thoughts about that, David?
Yeah, I was thinking based on some of Jack's comments that if we're going to be looking at 5th year completion or looking at as more of a 10 through 14, maybe we can be asking that institutions that want that should have some kind of showing that they're doing some kind of alignment between the high school and the community college or university, that district, and some examples of that, how they're really doing that kind of alignment and having it in place. And I know he didn't reference some examples, but I'm just thinking the Eastern Promise, I'm thinking the early college, Portland Community College and Portland Public Schools, some of what they're doing down in the 4J district, for example. I think that really, you know, it may not just be something of just putting in a, you know, a number goal to meet, but more ensuring that those alignments are taking place and being acted upon.
It occurs to me that maybe those local priorities would be a place to talk about that. Mm-hmm. Maybe we look at it differently in terms of how those priorities are talked about. Okay.
Seth just handed me a document from Talk Board that he also wanted to have added to the discussion today around best practices related to teacher education. So.
Do we have anybody who wants to report or highlight any of those? From
Yeah, Yvonne, given the agenda, we weren't clear as to what the subject matter was going to be today. This is more related to other aspects of the subcommittee deliberations. So
okay.
Why don't we work with your staff and
that'd be great.
We'll figure out a better time. We didn't want to miss an opportunity, so that's the
Thank you. Good. That's good. Things are moving so fast. Don't miss an opportunity. Keep us alerted. That's a great Great plan. Okay. So, do we have public testimony? I know it was advertised that we do. I don't know if anybody's signed in.
No, the sign-in sheet is blank.
Okay, so we have one more meeting in November for sure. A possible meeting on the 27th. Is that one scheduled for sure yet?
I believe the view is that the subcommittees would meet even if the full OEIB does not meet because of the need to have our assignments completed by December 11th.
So if we can, as a subcommittee, be ready to move forward some recommendations next time based on the information you bring to us, would be helpful, because then that just leaves the 27th. The following meeting is on December 11th, and all our recommendations have to be to OEIB, I understand, by December 11th. So that means just 5 minutes later, on December 11th, we'd have to be ready with some others. So I'm a little bit thinking that the more important work will happen November 7th and November 27th. And what happens on December 11th will either just be confirming some things we've done prior or setting up our work for the rest of the time going forward. Okay?
And we're meeting again November 1st, is that correct? Thursday, November 1st. This subcommittee?
This subcommittee is November 7th.
Okay.
7th and 27th. And
so the request that we heard as staff was that we pair the subcommittee meetings with the regular OEIB board meetings in order to better facilitate board member participation, given travel schedules and very busy calendars.
So given that's not very far away to the next meeting, I know you'll be working as quickly as you can, but as soon as you can get documents out, that would be helpful to the committee, so we can carefully review those documents and be definitely ready to make some decisions, hopefully by next meeting. Okay, if there's no more questions.
Let's just make sure that Nancy gets a copy of all the materials.
Nancy, yes.
Yes.
We'll make sure she does. All right, as well as Mark. Okay, this time I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Adjourned.